So welcome to Faith and Trust in God, lesson number 11. We have been doing a study of Chovos HaLevavos, Shara Bitachon, or Duties of the Heart, the Gate of Trust, by Rabbi Bachya Ibn Paquda, an 11th century scholar who wrote a book called Chovos HaLevavos, in other words, Duties of the Heart or Obligations of the Heart, as opposed to most other Jewish works, which mainly deal with the duties of the limbs, namely how to put on tefillin, how to light Shabbat candles, how to do a mitzvah, etc. And in our conversation, what we're holding is the latest thing that Rabbi Bachya has done is he has entered the conversation of the balance between working on something on our own and God giving it to us. In other words, God trusting that Hashem will give it to us. So his example is sustenance. So we'll roll with that. We all have to trust in Hashem that Hashem provides for us. Hashem gives us food. Hashem gives us money. Hashem gives us business. Hashem gives us however it is that we make our living and our livelihood. Yet at the same time, we are obviously required to get up off the couch and do something about it, right? Put your best foot forward and somehow make that money. Back to that example at the beginning of our nation's birth, we said that even when it came to the manna, right? The manna didn't. God could have easily made exactly the same miracle that the Jewish people should just be satiated, should just be full, be sustained, and wouldn't need to eat in the desert. Just as he made, by the way, they didn't use the restroom, for instance, for 40 years in the desert. Right? Everybody knows that because the manna, one of the like miraculous traits or what have you of the manna was that it didn't contain anything that wasn't good for the body. So there was no sorting process. Everything, it contained the exact nutrients that your body needed at exactly that moment and exactly that time and exactly that situation. So therefore, there was no relieving themselves. Just as Hashem did that, Hashem easily could have done that. They didn't need to go outside and collect the manna. By the fact that Hashem chose to do that and made the process so that they would actually need to go out, collect the manna, etc. This obviously means that Hashem wants our effort. And this is where our conversation led us to last week. So last week we discussed at least over the past 2 weeks, we discussed 2 reasons as to why that would be so, right? In other words, what are the reasons why Hashem would have created us specifically in such a manner that we actually can work for ourselves. We actually must work for ourselves. There needs to be that balance between the two. In other words, the human intervention part of it and the faith in Hashem part, the trust in Hashem. And so 2 weeks ago, we learned reason number 1, and that was the reason for trials. In other words, challenges that a big part of the character of this world, the nature of this world is, hold on. I'm getting back some text messages from some of the people that I reached out to. A big part of the nature of this world is that Hashem wants us to have challenges. If things were easy, that would defeat not the purpose, but would defeat it wouldn't be as valuable to Hashem. So Hashem says, I want it to be challenging. So therefore, I make it so that you need to actually work hard, and then only then does the money come, and the sustenance come, and only then does Hashem send the bracha. And the second reason was in order to avoid rebelling against Hashem or sinning, etc. Yidden, or I should say human beings, it's not just Jews, human beings, when left to their own devices, in other words, because of various ways that Hashem created us, in that we don't always, we're getting a little feedback. All right. Because of the way that Hashem created us, that we don't, that we don't always appreciate things. So it says, Hashem, I want you to be involved in the process, like that you don't think, you don't learn to not appreciate it anymore and then spit me back in the face. Right, which, by the way, even in the desert, right, during the 40 years when the Jewish people were wandering in the wilderness, we could take example from there where, yes, they were given the manna and they didn't need meaning they definitely needed to trust in Hashem, but because they weren't involved in the process, they trusted everything's coming from Hashem, and it was considered almost like the same way I snap my fingers. That's how Hashem sends me food. There was a lack of appreciation for the process that goes into it, and that's why the Jewish people ended up complaining, right? And they're rebelling against Hashem, sinning against Hashem, whether it was asking for slav, for the quail, or things like that, right? So in order to rectify this issue, says Hashem, I'm gonna necessitate, and I'm gonna involve in the process human intervention. So these are two reasons that we've given for why there has to be human involvement in the process, and it shouldn't just be Hashem snapping his fingers and we have whatever we need, whether that be health or livelihood or whatever it is. So again, number one is challenges. Hashem wants us to overcome that challenge, and number two is appreciation, like that we don't come to rebel against Hashem. In other words, we appreciate the effort that Hashem puts into it. But continues Rabbi Bachya in today's lesson, not always does a person need to toil. A person can reach a stage where they actually don't need to invest as much effort into. Welcome, Andrea. We don't. A person can reach a stage where they don't need to invest that effort. And what is that level? It might be a little bit tzaddik-like, maybe a little bit too high for some of us. But let's talk about it, all right? Because from there we're gonna segue into our next conversation. Lois, you want to read for us a little bit?
Yes. When man needs not to toil, if, however, a person gives priority to the service of Hashem and resolves to fear him, trusts in him in all his interests, religious and secular, turns away from the despicable things and aspires to good qualities, does not rebel when in comfort, nor inclined toward leisure, is not swayed by his baser instincts, nor seduced by the enchanting things of the world, then he will be relieved of the burden of seeking and searching for a livelihood. Since the two reasons for obliging him to do so that have been mentioned, trial and rebellion in the midst of prosperity, will have become inapplicable to him. His livelihood will come to him without trouble or weariness, to the extent of his needs and requirements, as it is written, Hashem will not let the righteous go hungry.
So, thank you, Lois. So, says Rabbi Bachya, there is another choice. You don't have to follow this process. In other words, you don't have to choose to make it that, because Hashem wanted to be a challenge for us, and Hashem doesn't want us to not appreciate the process, and that's going to bring us to rebel against him. So therefore, there must be human involvement. Says Rabbi Bachya, if you put your best foot forward, in other words, if you choose to circumvent the two reasons for which there needs to be human involvement, by showing Hashem, you don't need to do that to me, you don't need my involvement in the process, because I'm already showing you that I trust in you and I appreciate you, and and I'm already overcoming that challenge. So then Hashem won't necessitate the human involvement, and He'll send you your sustenance, without you needing to toil so hard over it, right? Same thing with health, by the way, right? What is that shortcut? That shortcut is dedicating your life to Hashem, right? What are His words? If, however, a person gives priority to the service of Hashem and resolves to fear Him, you see these people sometimes that they live like a tzaddik, right? They do the mitzvahs of Hashem. They wake up every morning saying, "What else can I do to serve Hashem?" They've chosen to dedicate their lives to the service of Hashem, and as a result, Hashem says, "Okay, you know what? If that's what you're doing and you're telling me you're going to rely on me for your sustenance, then I'll figure it out. Don't worry. I don't need you to necessarily be standing and selling whatever it is, phones or bottles of water or whatever. You don't need to be doing that. The same thing with health. You don't need to go through the doctor. If you're going to choose to dedicate yourself to me entirely, all right, I'll figure it out already. Don't worry. I can find other ways. I don't need to go the natural way. One way of putting this, as I was preparing the class, these words popped in my head is, if you act supernatural with God, says Hashem, I'll act supernatural with you. I set up a natural way, a natural order as to the way the world works. If you're going to deal with me in a natural way, in other words, there's times when you serve Hashem, there's times when you're enjoying a 4th of July barbecue, there's times when you're, whatever it is. So says Hashem, okay, then you need to go through the process, which I set up. Of course, that process is meant to circumvent certain things. But says Hashem, if you choose to go above that, and to say, no, I'm going to be supernatural with Hashem. I'm going to dedicate my life to Hashem. On a small level, by the way, shluchim see this. I know in Farbrengens with shluchim, this happens all the time, Chabad rabbis. The job of a Chabad rabbi is to do just so. We move out, and I'm not tooting my own horn here. I've seen it once or twice in my own life. I don't think that I merit to be the best at trusting in Hashem and doing all of this. That's why I'm giving this class. Part of it is because I myself want to get better at it. but I've certainly heard from superiors of mine, not just superiors of mine, but from colleagues of mine that I respect and that I watch them. What happens when somebody chooses to be a shliach of the Rebbe? They say to themselves, "Listen, Hashem, I'm choosing to say I'm not going to work, but I am going to work very hard. In other words, I'm not going to work to make a living, but I am going to work very hard. I'm going to say to myself, I'm going to throw myself fully into this Chabad of wherever it is, Chabad of Timbuktu. Even though I have no idea who are the people that are going to come to Chabad of Timbuktu and who are the people that are going to support the Chabad of Timbuktu. I'm relying on you because I'm giving myself up fully to that." And Hashem finds, of course, they have to put their best foot forward and they have to actually do the work that they're committed to doing, whatever it is, spreading Yiddishkeit or teaching Torah or making a shul available in some far off place. But many shluchim say that they see miracles in these regards. They didn't see where the bills were going to come for the next month. Who's going to pay the electricity bill at Chabad, or who's going to how even their own salary, by the way, which Chabad is supposed to pay them, how that's going to come forward. And Hashem says, you know what? Don't worry, you acted supernatural with me. You jumped into this business, even though, meaning business in ear quotations, right? Even though you could have been a successful businessman. Most Chabad rabbis are pretty talented people, and I'm sure if they would have chosen to sell water bottles, they could have done a very good job at that too, right? Says Hashem, but you gave that up for me. I'll figure out how to support you. And now's not time to start saying stories, but at Farbrengens, very often shluchim will be there together and they'll share these stories with each other. So I just wanted to share that with you. But here's the problem. Here's the catch. The catch is that when you choose to do this, when you choose to take the supernatural route, Hashem says, but now I get to judge you very, very, very carefully. Because you're choosing to be such a tzaddik. So but the moment that you're not, you lose the bet, all bets are off. Now you go back to the natural way, and now you got to work hard, but you're not working, right? So, meaning if you're not serving Hashem, then you got to be working. Let's see one example that Rashi tells us with regards to Joseph when he was in prison. Steve, you want to read for us a little bit?
Okay, he will be relieved of the burden of seeking and searching for a livelihood. This concept that certain righteous people are exempt from and even punished for making any type of vessel of his sustenance and blessing is evidence from his teachings of our sages regarding Yosef Hatzadik. When Yosef was in jail in Egypt, he requested from the butler who was in jail with him to mention him in front of Pharaoh, so that he gains freedom. However, we are told he was forgotten. Rashi explains that Yosef being forgotten was a punishment for requesting intervention from the butler, for the butler, and not putting his full trust in God.
Now, but before we see the explanation behind this, let me just clarify. This is not a magnifying glass which is held up to everybody. I'm sure we can all attest that in our own lives, we're not always the best at trusting in Hashem. And just because one day we decide to invest some money in the stock market and say, hopefully I'll make some money, right? We choose to make a vessel, like we say, right? We choose to say, okay, today I'm going to try to get this business deal to go through. Hashem doesn't judge us and say, oh, you're not relying on me. I'll show you, right? That's not what happens. But when it comes to Yosef Hatzadik, we're going to see that was the case. It's viewed as a derogatory remark on Joseph's record. And so much so that it took 2 years until, because just to refresh everybody's memory, in Parshas Vayeshev, at the end of Parshas Vayeshev, which is the 6th or 7th parsha of the Torah, we read about Joseph being in prison, right? He was sold down step after step from his brothers. First, his brothers sold him to some spice dealers, and then they brought him down to Egypt, and then they sold him to Potiphar, and then Potiphar's wife pretended that, whatever, she staged this whole thing that Joseph was trying to rape her. It was absolutely fabricated, and Joseph gets thrown into prison. When he's thrown into prison, so he's there with the minister of the butlers and the minister of the bakers, right? In other words, the chief butler and the chief baker, the chief bartender and the chief baker. And they have a dream. They both have a dream that night. And Joseph, by the way, is extremely righteous, and he's extremely God-fearing, and he's extremely trusting in Hashem. So much so that when they have these dreams, and he walks in one day and he says to them, why are you melancholy? Why are you depressed? Why? Right? Because he sees their faces are down. They had both had these dreams. So they say, well, we both had dreams, and we don't know how to interpret it. We don't know. We don't have any sort of interpretation. So Joseph looks at them and he says, oh, why don't you try me out? I'll try to interpret your dream, and maybe Hashem will send me the answer. Indeed, they both tell him the dreams. He interprets them, and they both come true. The minister of the butlers, like the chief butler's interpretation was that he was going to be reinstated at his position, at his former position, and he's going to once again serve Pharaoh beginning on his birthday. So Joseph tells him, he says, listen, you're going to be reinstated. When you're reinstated, I want you to remember me and tell Pharaoh that there's this nice Jewish boy, right? Suffering here in prison, and he should come take me out, right? So the last verse, Parshas Vayeshev, tells us that this indeed happened. The last couple of verses tell us that this is indeed what happened. He was reinstated. But the last verse tells us that the chief butler did not remember Joseph's words, or whatever. He didn't remember about Joseph, and he forgot him. So says Rashi, what's this extra? What did he forgot him? You just told me he didn't remember him. What does it mean that he forgot him? So Rashi explains that Yosef being forgotten was an active forgetting. In other words, Hashem actively made the butler, the minister of the butler, or the chief butler, forget Joseph for 2 years, by the way, this ended up being. And it was because Hashem wasn't so happy that Joseph didn't trust in Hashem. Now, like I just mentioned, what's up? Why are you holding him up to such a high standard? A magnifying glass you're holding up. What did he do? What did he do already, right? Like look at everything. He was amazing. Even when he's interpreting dreams, he's saying, Hashem is going to show me. He credits Hashem with everything he does. He fears Hashem. Everything he does is going the ways of Hashem. He was very, very careful. By the way, it wasn't just that Potiphar's wife pretended that he raped her. It started the other way. She tried to seduce him. And he could have gone along with the story. No. He was righteous in all of his ways. Right? You're going to hold him up to this fine standard of like, oh my gosh, you asked somebody to help you out a little bit? What's the big deal? What's the big deal? He was basically, in the words of Rabbi Bachya, all he was making was a vessel. Right? Remember how he said that it's important, even if somebody's pouring you water, you got to have a cup. And based on that cup, that's how much you're given. Right? But that Hashem is still the one pouring the water. Hashem is still pouring the brachas. So Joseph was making a vessel. What's the big deal? The difference is that he wasn't on that track. He wasn't on that plan. He was on the righteous people plan. And over there, there's a little bit of a different approach. Leah, you want to read for us a little bit, please? We're holding right here. The Rabbeinu
Bachya explains, God forbid that Yosef placed his trust in the butler. Rather, his trust was in God alone. Yosef nonetheless thought that God has prepared the butler for him, that he be the messenger through which God will perform the miracle of his freedom. This, however, was a mistake, because he thought that he needed a natural vessel for God's blessings, and righteous men like Yosef should have known that he does not need natural paths through which the blessings should flow, for God is the source of all vessels and blessings, and he should have placed his trust in him alone.
Says Rabbeinu Bachya, thank you, Leah. Says Rabbeinu Bachya, so what's the deal here? He says, look. I finished giving you 2 reasons why you need to have trust. Not why you need to have trust in Hashem. I give you many reasons why you need to have trust in Hashem. I finished giving you 2 reasons why you need to have human involvement in addition to the trust in Hashem. Why we also need to do something. It says Rabbeinu Bachya, those vessels are not really needed. Hashem is not like a human being. Human beings, if they're pouring you water, they need. Excuse me. Sorry, hold on. Human beings have this thing. If they're going to pour you water, they need you to have a cup. If they're going to give you something, there needs to be a vessel. Says Rabbeinu Bachya, but Hashem is not like that. Really, he doesn't need any of these vessels. The reason for these 2 vessels was only because of our humanity. Right? Remember those 2 reasons? In order that we shouldn't rebel against Hashem, in order that we should appreciate it, and in order that it not be a challenge, meaning that it should be a challenge for us. So says Rabbeinu Bachya, those are all human inventions. That's because of the natural order by which Hashem set up the world. But because Joseph was a holy man, therefore he was held to a higher standard. What are you making vessels for? Stop making vessels. You're a righteous person, and you should know that we go the high route. Hashem is going to give it to you, and Hashem is going to be the only source, not even a vessel. Right? So that's the reason why Joseph was held to such a high standard. But let's see even a little bit deeper than this. This comes from a combination of different books. But I want to finish off this point, and then we'll call it a day, because it's going to take us a little while. Arnold, you want to read for us a little bit?
From where?
This, however.
Okay. This, however, needs further clarification. The
Which is the book we're reading right now, Duties of the Heart.
Okay, teaches that it is an obligation to make a natural vessel for God's blessing. What then was Joseph's sin?
Right? So he says, what do you mean Yosef should have known not to make a vessel? He was making a vessel because that's what even the Chovos HaLevavos is saying you need to make a vessel. Go ahead. The answer is
that there are, in general, two types of people: those whom the materialistic world affects, and those whom stand alone, aloof from the world, even while they live in the world.
Thank you. Okay, so turns out that there are two different types of Jews, right? There are the words we gave for them so far were the natural order Jew and the supernatural order Jew, right? But here he's going to call them the worldly Jew and the otherworldly Jew. Okay, so Stephanie, you want to get us started? Read for us a little bit about the worldly Jew. Number one.
The worldly Jew, his character and soul level is one that relates to and is compatible with the world. This person, as righteous as he might be, needs to take steps to seclude from the temptation, challenges, and struggles of the
There you go. Of the world.
world. This person also works with the rules of the world. Such a person needs to make vessels for his blessings.
But says Rabbi Bachya that there is someone who's above that, the otherworldly Jew. Lisa, you want to read for us a little bit? Number two.
Thank you. Number two, the otherworldly Jew. This Jew lives in the world but remains above it. His living in the world does not take away from his relationship with God. He can walk in the ways of the land and yet remain truly devoted to God. This person does not work with the rules of the world, for he lives above them. Such a person needs to put his trust in God alone. Many righteous men, like the tribes, were shepherds. They were worldly Jews. They wanted to remain separate from the temptations of the world because they were scared of it. So they found a vocation that allowed them to remain devoted to God. Joseph, however, was an otherworldly Jew. The world could not remove him from his devotion to God. That is why he was able to be and was a viceroy in Egypt, because the worldly affairs were not an obstacle to him.
Thank you. So it turns out these two people are both tzaddikim. We're talking about two people that are doing amazing in terms of their trust in Hashem. The difference is, can they survive in the physical world or not? What does that mean? In a weird twist of words here, the worldly Jew chooses to live outside the world. The otherworldly Jew says, I can live inside the world. What does that mean? The worldly Jew says, I am affected by the world. That's the fact. And I know, therefore, that if I have a profession that's going to tempt me to make more and more money, right? I mean, examples here are Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? So therefore, I'm going to want to make more money. That's just the way I am. So therefore, I choose a profession which leads me and shows my faith in Hashem, my trust in Hashem. What is that? Being a shepherd or whatever it is. Joseph was I don't know if he was the first, but he was a true example of an otherworldly Jew. In other words, he lived supernaturally even in the physical world. The Rebbe often points out that Joseph was the first one of our ancestors and of the tzaddikim, right, our forefathers, to really be embedded within the klipa. Right? Meaning within the negative forces. Think about it. Joseph not only comes down to Egypt, that's like the beginning of it, but Joseph succeeds in Egypt. And yet that doesn't take away from his spirituality. How powerful is that? Right? He becomes the viceroy of Egypt. I don't know how many of you could become the viceroy of any country and still say, oh, I'm going to trust in Hashem. I'm going to walk around as if, right? As if I'm the holiest man. Meaning I'm still spirituality is going to be who I am. It's going to be my middle name. And my serving of Hashem is going to be the most important thing in my life. And I'm going to recognize that everything that I have is only because Hashem gave it to me. As human beings, that's one of the hardest things to do. We love to credit ourselves with our own success. Right? So the Rebbe explains that Joseph was the first one to go down into the world and to live in physically in the world and yet be completely not in the world. In other words, in halacha, there are lots of different categories, different types of Jews and different types of things and whatever, right? And whatever different ways that things happen. One of the phrases that's used is that sometimes you have a Jew who's Yodeya es Ribono Mechaven Limrod Bo, considered one of the worst levels. In other words, you have Jews, they're not following the Torah, the mitzvos, because they have a challenge. And that's most of us, by the way, right? We struggle. I like a good steak, so whatever, fine. I like non-kosher food, so therefore maybe I slip up, right? I like not to keep Shabbos. I like to go to the movies on Shabbos. That's why I don't keep Shabbos. That's a Jew, all right, he loves Hashem, he knows Hashem, and he doesn't want to rebel against Hashem. Just what should he do that he has this other side to him? Not what should he do, what he should do is fight it. We know what he should do. But that's why he's slipping up, right? That's most Jews. By the way, even holier than that, you have Jews who don't even know that it's not allowed, right? You have Jews that they don't keep Shabbos, but they don't even know that Shabbos is a thing, right? But then one of the lowest forms of somebody who's rebelling against Hashem is Yodeya Sribono Mechaven Limrod Bo. He knows who Hashem is. He appreciates Judaism. He knows what Judaism is all about. He appreciates Hashem. He recognizes Hashem. He recognizes what Hashem tells him to do, and he says, no, I'm rebelling against you. I could keep kosher. I'm choosing not to because I'm upset at Hashem. Because I'm not upset. Upset is the wrong word. Because I want to go against the will of Hashem. And that's obviously a very strong statement, right? That's a very wicked person, right? He's not saying I struggle. I know that Hashem wants to keep Shabbos, but what should I do? It's hard for me. He's saying I know Hashem wants to keep Shabbos, and I'm not keeping Shabbos, right? So with regards to the Alter Rebbe, they used to say about him that he was the opposite. Yodeya et olamo u'mechaven limrod bo. He knows the physical world, and he rebels against it. In other words, this doesn't mean. Meaning you have some righteous people that, all right, they don't really, they're so busy in the books and whatever, do they really know the temptations of this physical? They don't really know the temptations. They used to say about the Alter Rebbe that he knows the physical world. He knows all the temptations of the physical world. He knows them well. But he actively chooses to rebel against the physical world. That's Joseph. He lives in the physical world. He knows all the temptations of the physical world. He was the viceroy of Egypt. We just spoke about how he was on the brink of rape, seduction, whatever you want to call it, right? And yet he thrived. Yet he was completely devoted on a spiritual level. That's the otherworldly Jew, okay? But yet, this is why Joseph was punished for making a vessel for his freedom. I'll finish off the reading here. As the Rabbi Bachya explains, because on his spiritual standing, he should have been aware that he is one with God, and he did not need to worry about natural vessels. This is also true in an ordinary person's life. Often a person sees that he needs to put an effort into something to achieve it. That is because at that moment, and for that achievement, the world is an obstacle. So he needs to take natural measures to achieve his goal. There are, however, times when a person realizes that things are moving in a miraculous manner. And in such a case, if he does not make a vessel, he is not relying on a miracle, the miracle has happened. Or occasionally a person is in a situation where no natural vessel will help. In such a case, a person must realize that the hand of God is directly orchestrating these experiences, and he needs to place his trust in God alone. I'll finish off with one example, which we've definitely mentioned before at this class, but which is still very poignant and definitely applies to exactly this point. Sometimes, right, he said the two extremes. Sometimes we see that things are working miraculously, like Joseph. Don't get involved. Stop making vessels. Your vessels are not going to help, right? Hashem has got the reins in his hand right now. That's one way. But sometimes we're at the opposite extreme. We mentioned, particularly when it comes to health, that the Talmud says that there's a verse in Parshas Mishpatim which says, "V'rapo yirapi," right? It's a double. He will heal, right? Healing, he will be healed. Says the Talmud, "Mikan." From here we learn shenitin reshus l'rofa l'rapos, that a healer, in other words, a doctor, is given the ability to heal, right? Hasidim often say that one of the things that because we live in this world we struggle with is that we like to give doctors not just the ability to heal, but also the ability to say when there's no healing available, right? You walk into a doctor, he says, "I'm sorry, sir, I'm sorry, ma'am, your situation is terrible, and therefore you have 6 months to live, and therefore start putting your affairs in order." That ability, that permission was never given to a doctor. In other words, Mikan, said the Talmud. From here, we know, from that verse in the Torah, that there was permission given to a healer to heal. There was no permission given to a healer not to heal. There was no permission to a healer to tell you when healing is not available. Go to a different healer. Figure out a different way. This is the other extreme of the point that we're making here. That sometimes we see when things are going in a miraculous way. And sometimes we see that things are just so dire. I'll put that in air quotes because they're never really dire, right? Hashem is always in control. But sometimes things seem so dire that the doctor tells us we have 6 months left or whatever. No, not we, chas v'shalom. But the doctor tells someone that they have 6 months left. Says the Rabbeinu Chaya, that's the time to pull out your otherworldly self. That's the time to tap into trusting in Hashem, not because it makes sense, not because I know He has a plan. Trust in Hashem because because you don't operate in it. Because if you trust in Hashem in that moment, you can actually bring forth a miracle that's taka higher, that really is higher than the natural order of this world. And with this, we'll conclude lesson number 11 of Faith and Trust in God, our weekly textual study of Chovas HaLevavos, or duties of the heart.
Thank you very much.